My name is Nora Whitman. I'm 34 years old, and I've already built and lost and reclaimed an empire. This is how I took back what was mine. The first line of code for what would become VeraCore was written on a Thursday night in my decrepit Detroit apartment. Rain lashed against the windows, and the old radiator clanked and hissed like some dying industrial beast. The building was the kind of place where you could hear your neighbors' arguments through paper-thin walls and where mice occasionally scurried across the kitchen floor when you flipped on the lights at 3 a.m. I was hunched over a second-hand laptop, its fan whirring constantly as if it might give out at any moment. The pizza box beside me had been empty for hours, and the dregs of my coffee had gone cold. But I didn't notice any of it. I was consumed by the problem in front of me, the puzzle I'd been piecing together for months. "Come on," I muttered, rubbing my eyes as I stared at the screen. "Just work." I'd been laid off from my job at a mid-tier tech company 3 months earlier. Budget cuts, they'd said, nothing personal. I'd been given 2 weeks severance and a handshake from a manager who couldn't quite meet my eyes. Now my savings were dwindling, and rent was due in 5 days. But none of that mattered at that moment, because the algorithm I'd been working on, the one that analyzed nonverbal customer interactions to predict satisfaction and loyalty, was finally starting to yield results. The data patterns were emerging exactly as I'd theorized they would. My hands trembled slightly as I ran another test. Outside, a car alarm started wailing, adding to the symphony of urban decay that was the soundtrack of my life. But I barely heard it. The test results were loading. When the numbers appeared on screen, I sat back, momentarily stunned. It worked. It actually worked. My algorithm could predict customer churn with 89% accuracy based solely on facial expressions, body language, and other nonverbal cues captured on standard security cameras. I laughed, a sound that startled even me in the quiet apartment. Then I cried. Then I called Mikhail. "It's 2 a.m. Nora," he groaned when he picked up. "It works," I said, my voice catching. "The model works." There was a pause, and I could almost see him sitting up in bed, suddenly alert. "Holy shit," he whispered. "For real?" "For real. 89% accuracy. We've got something. Mikhail, we've really got something." I met Mikhail Ivanov during my brief stint at WebTech Solutions. He was the only one who saw potential in my idea when I first pitched it internally. When we both got laid off in the same round of cuts, we stayed in touch. He believed in me when nobody else did. "Send me the data," he said, now fully awake. "I'll look at it right now." "Already did. Check your email." As I waited for Mikhail to review my work, I stood up and stretched, my body stiff from sitting in the same position for hours. I walked to the window and looked out at the rain-slicked streets below. Detroit wasn't exactly a tech hub, but it was home. I'd grown up in the outskirts, daughter of a factory worker and a waitress who'd both lost their jobs in the economic collapse of 2008. They'd sacrificed everything to send me to college, the first in our family to go. And now, maybe, just maybe, I could build something that would make their sacrifice worth it. My phone buzzed with a text from Mikhail. "This is groundbreaking. We need to meet tomorrow, early." I smiled. Tomorrow would mark the beginning of something new. I just didn't know how far it would take me. The next morning, I met Mikhail at a coffee shop downtown. He looked as exhausted as I felt, but his eyes were bright with excitement. "I couldn't sleep after seeing those results," he admitted, clutching his coffee like a lifeline. "Do you realize what we've created?" I nodded, feeling a mix of pride and trepidation. A system that can revolutionize customer service and retail strategy. Not just that. Mikhail leaned forward, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "You've created something that bridges the gap between AI and human understanding. This isn't just about predicting which customers might leave. It's about teaching machines to read human emotion in context. The applications go way beyond retail." He was right. Of course. My background was in artificial intelligence with a focus on behavioral psychology. I'd always been fascinated by the subtle cues humans give off, the micro expressions and body language that often reveal more than words. Teaching a machine to recognize and interpret these signals had been my obsession since graduate school. We need to start a company, Mikhail said firmly. I have some savings, not much, but enough to get us incorporated and maybe set up a basic website. You focus on refining the algorithm, and I'll handle the business side. With what money? I asked, the practical side of me taking over. We'd need computing power, office space, legal advice. We start small, he interrupted. Your apartment, my laptop, free Wi-Fi at coffee shops. We bootstrap until we can get our first client or investor interested. I hesitated, thinking of my dwindling bank account and looming rent payment. Starting a business had never been my plan. I was a researcher at heart, not an entrepreneur. Nora, Mikhail said softly, reading my hesitation. If we don't do this, someone else will. Maybe not exactly the same, but close enough. And you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what could have been. His words hit home. I took a deep breath and nodded. Okay, I said, let's do it. That was how VeraCore was born, not in some gleaming Silicon Valley office or a Boston incubator, but in a run-down Detroit coffee shop between two recently unemployed tech workers with more ambition than resources. We spent the next 3 months working around the clock. My apartment became our headquarters, with whiteboards propped against walls and extension cords snaking across the floor. I refined the algorithm while Mikhail worked his network, trying to get us in front of anyone who might be interested in our technology. Our break came from an unexpected direction. A regional supermarket chain, Midwest Market, was dealing with a PR crisis after a video went viral showing a cashier being rude to an elderly customer. The company's customer satisfaction ratings had plummeted, and they were desperate for solutions. Mikkel somehow got us a meeting with their VP of operations, an intimidating woman named Heather Patel who looked at us like we were selling snake oil when we first walked in. So let me get this straight, she said after our pitch. Your software can predict which of my customers are likely to stop shopping with us based on what? Their facial expressions? Not just facial expressions, I explained, trying to keep my voice steady. It's a complex analysis of multiple nonverbal cues, environmental factors, and interaction patterns. The system learns and adapts over time, becoming more accurate with more data. And you've tested this where, exactly? She asked, arching an eyebrow. I swallowed hard. We've run simulations using publicly available retail interaction datasets and... So nowhere real, she interrupted. You have a theory with no practical application testing. That's why we're here. Mikhail jumped in smoothly. We're offering you a pilot program, no upfront cost. We'll install our system in one of your stores for 30 days. If it doesn't deliver results, you owe us nothing. I shot him a panicked look. We hadn't discussed a free pilot. And if it does work? Heather asked, looking slightly more interested. Then we negotiate a fair price for implementing it across your stores, Mikhail replied confidently. Heather considered us for a long moment. 1 store, 2 weeks, and you sign an NDA. Deal, Mikhail said before I could respond. And just like that, we had our first client. The next 2 weeks were a blur of activity. We installed our system in Midwest Market's flagship store, using their existing security cameras to feed data into our algorithm. I worked day and night, fine-tuning the model as real-world data started flowing in. By day 3, our system had flagged a particular checkout lane as problematic. Customers who went through this lane showed subtle signs of dissatisfaction, tightened jaw muscles, rigid posture, quick exits without the usual browsing behavior afterward. We brought this to Heather's attention. She was skeptical but agreed to investigate. It turned out the cashier at that lane had a broken foot scanner, forcing customers to repeatedly swipe items. The issue had been reported multiple times but had fallen through the cracks of management. How did your system catch this when our customer satisfaction surveys didn't? Heather asked, genuinely curious. People don't always verbalize minor frustrations, I explained. They might not think a slow checkout is worth mentioning on a survey, but it affects their overall experience and, eventually, their loyalty. By the end of the 2-week trial, Our system had identified 7 operational issues that were negatively impacting customer experience. Heather was impressed enough to extend the pilot for another month and add 2 more stores. 3 months later, Midwest Market signed a contract to implement VeraCore across their entire chain. The fee they paid allowed us to move out of my apartment and into a small office space in downtown Detroit. We hired our first 2 employees, a data scientist named James Wong and a UX designer named Lena Torres. Word began to spread about our technology. A retail industry blog wrote a piece about how Midwest Market had improved their customer satisfaction scores using an AI system developed by a scrappy Detroit startup. Inquiries started coming in, first as a trickle, then a steady stream. By our 1-year anniversary, VeraCore had 20 employees and clients across 3 states. We were profitable, growing, and I was finally paying myself a decent salary. My parents came to visit our office, and I'll never forget the look of pride on my father's face as he looked around at what his daughter had built. "You did good, kid," he said, his voice gruff with emotion. "Really good." Life was better than I'd ever imagined it could be. I was doing work I loved, leading a team of brilliant people, and making a tangible difference in how businesses understood and served their customers. I should have known it wouldn't last. The trouble began in our 2nd year. Though I didn't recognize the warning signs at first, we'd grown to 50 employees and moved to a larger office. Our client list included major retailers and service providers across the country. Revenue was strong, and we were working on new applications for our technology beyond retail. That's when the acquisition offers started coming in, first from a marketing analytics firm, then from a customer relationship management software company. We turned them down. VeraCore was my baby, and I wasn't ready to give it up. Then came the offer from Catalyst West. I'd never heard of them before, but Mikhail, now our official COO, was impressed by their credentials. They were a mid-sized investment firm based in Austin, specializing in scaling tech companies for eventual IPO. Their portfolio included several successful exits, and they had a reputation for letting founders maintain significant control. They're offering $50 million. Nora, Mikhail said, his voice hushed with awe. $50 million, plus they want you to stay on as chief science officer. They're promising resources to expand R&D, access to their network of enterprise clients, the works. I frowned, uncomfortable with the idea of selling. We're doing fine on our own. Why do we need them? We're doing well, yes. Mikhail agreed, but we're hitting growth barriers. Expanding internationally requires resources we don't have. Enterprise clients want to see more stability and infrastructure than a 50-person company can demonstrate. Catalyst West can give us that. I knew he had a point. We'd recently lost a bid for a major airline contract specifically because they didn't think we had the capacity to scale. I need to think about it, I said. That night, I called my parents for advice. My father, always practical, asked one simple question. Will selling make you happy, or will you regret giving up control? I didn't have a clear answer. The next day, I asked to meet with Catalyst West's representatives in person. 2 men in expensive suits came to our office, Benjamin Hayes, their lead investor, and Marcus Reynolds, their legal counsel. We're extremely impressed with what you've built, Benjamin said, his smile practiced but warm. VeraCore has tremendous potential, and we want to help you realize it. Why us specifically? I asked. There are other AI companies with similar growth trajectories. Benjamin leaned forward, his expression earnest. Because you've created something uniquely valuable, your technology doesn't just analyze data, it understands human behavior in a way no other AI system does. That's a game changer across multiple industries. We spent hours discussing their vision for VeraCore's future. They wanted to expand our technology into healthcare, financial services, and education. They talked about IPO potential within 3 to 5 years. And my role? I asked. You mentioned Chief Science Officer, but what does that actually mean in practice? You'd lead all research and development. Benjamin explained. Your focus would be on advancing the core technology while we handle scaling the business operations. Your expertise is in AI and human behavior. That's where you should be spending your energy, not worrying about HR policies and quarterly earnings calls. It sounded reasonable. I was a researcher at heart, not a CEO. As ViraCore had grown, I'd found myself spending more time on administrative tasks and less on innovation. Still, I had reservations. I need guarantees that the technology won't be misused. We've been careful about ethical considerations in how our AI is deployed. Absolutely. Benjamin nodded. We share your commitment to ethical AI. That would be written into any agreement. After weeks of negotiations and due diligence, I was leaning toward accepting their offer. Mikhail was fully on board, excited about the possibilities that Catalyst West's resources would open up. There was just one detail that bothered me. I don't understand why you're insisting on a complete acquisition rather than a significant investment, I said during one of our final negotiation sessions. Why not take a majority stake but let us maintain some ownership? Benjamin exchanged a look with Marcus before responding. It's about clean corporate structure. For the growth trajectory we envision, including international expansion and eventually going public, we need clear lines of ownership and decision-making. I wasn't entirely satisfied with this answer, but I understood the logic. Still, something felt off. That night, I called Derek Hughes, a lawyer friend from college who specialized in tech acquisitions. I explained the situation, and he agreed to review the contract pro bono, as a favor for an old friend. 2 days later, he called me back. Nora, this contract is interesting, he said, his tone cautious. It's standard in many ways, but there are clauses buried in the fine print that concern me. What kind of clauses? I asked, my stomach tightening. Essentially, they're setting up a structure where you could be removed from your position with minimal severance if certain performance metrics aren't met. Metrics that aren't clearly defined in the contract. I felt a chill run down my spine. They said I'd have full control over R&D. The contract doesn't guarantee that, Derek said bluntly. It places you in the CSO role, but your authority can be limited by board decisions, and the board would be controlled by Catalyst West. I thanked him and hung up, my mind racing. Was I being paranoid, or was Catalyst West planning to push me out eventually? I called an emergency meeting with Mikhail the next morning and shared my concerns. I think you're reading too much into this, he said after hearing me out. This is standard corporate structure stuff. Of course there are performance expectations. That's business. It feels wrong, Mikhail, like they're setting up a trap. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I get your concerns, but we're turning down $50 million based on a feeling. We've worked so hard to get here. Nora, this is our chance to take ViraCore to the next level. I looked around our office, at the team we'd built, the company we'd created from nothing. Were my fears holding us back from greatness? What if we counter with some protective clauses, I suggested. Something that safeguards our positions and the integrity of the technology? Mikhail brightened. Now that's constructive. What did you have in mind? I thought for a moment. What if we structure it so that if they terminate either of us without cause, we have the right to buy back our original equity at a nominal price? They'll never go for that. Mikhail scoffed. They might, I insisted. It would only apply in cases of termination without cause. If we underperform or violate company policies, the clause wouldn't apply. After much debate, Mikhail agreed to propose this addition to the contract. To our surprise, Catalyst West didn't immediately reject it. After some negotiation, they accepted a modified version. If I was terminated without cause within 5 years of the acquisition, I would have the right to repurchase my original equity stake for $1. The clause was buried in the contract as Section 12B, a seemingly insignificant addition that Benjamin dismissed as unnecessary but harmless. He was confident they would never need to terminate me without cause, so the clause was irrelevant from their perspective. With this protection in place, I finally agreed to the acquisition. The papers were signed, the money transferred, and ViraCore officially became a Catalyst West company. For the first few months, everything seemed to be going according to plan. Catalyst West infused the company with capital. allowing us to hire more staff and move to a sleek new office in a renovated industrial building. We began expanding into new markets, and our technology received glowing coverage in major tech publications. I was busy but happy, focusing on improving our core AI technology while Catalyst West handled the business expansion. Mikhail was thriving in his role as COO, working closely with the new executives Catalyst West had brought in. The first change that gave me pause was the hiring of Luke Camden as our new CFO. He arrived from Chicago with an MBA from a prestigious university and a resume full of impressive titles. But something about him set my teeth on edge from our first meeting. "We need to rethink our resource allocation," he announced within his first week. "We're spending too much on R&D relative to sales and marketing." I bristled at this. R&D is the heart of VeraCore. Our competitive advantage is our technology. Luke smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Of course, and your work is valuable. But at this stage of growth, we need to focus on monetizing what we've already developed rather than constantly chasing the next innovation." It was a reasonable business perspective, I supposed, but it felt fundamentally at odds with how I viewed VeraCore's mission. Next came Stacy Brunner, our new Chief Marketing Officer. She was stylish and energetic, with a background in consumer packaged goods marketing, a far cry from our B2B technology focus. "The logo needs to be more approachable," she declared in her first all-hands meeting. "And the name VeraCore is too technical. We need something that resonates emotionally with decision-makers." I exchanged glances with Lena, our original UX designer, who looked as confused as I felt. Our clients were enterprise businesses making data-driven decisions. They wanted technical competence, not emotional resonance. Gradually, the culture of VeraCore began to change. The open, collaborative environment we'd cultivated was replaced by rigid hierarchies and formal processes. New employees arrived who had no understanding of our core technology or vision. They came from Catalyst West's network, loyal to Luke and Stacy rather than to the company's original mission. Meanwhile, our original team members began to leave. James Wong, our first data scientist, accepted an offer from a competitor after being repeatedly sidelined in decisions about our technical architecture. Lena followed shortly after, frustrated by Stacy's insistence on a complete redesign of our user interface against all user testing data. I tried to raise these concerns with Mikhail, but he had changed too. He was now fully embedded in Catalyst West's vision, speaking their language of market penetration and shareholder value, as if he'd never been the idealistic engineer who believed in our original mission. "This is just the next phase of growth, Nora," he would say whenever I expressed concern. "Change is always uncomfortable, but it's necessary." I threw myself into my research, trying to block out the transformation happening around me. As long as I could keep advancing our technology, I told myself, the business side didn't matter. But even this became more difficult as resources were gradually diverted from R&D to marketing and sales. The first truly alarming sign came about 8 months after the acquisition. A meeting to review our research roadmap was rescheduled 3 times before being canceled altogether. When I demanded an explanation, Luke informed me that strategic priorities had shifted and the roadmap would be revisited next quarter. Then our R&D team was merged with the product marketing team, ostensibly to align technology development with market needs. In practice, this meant every research initiative had to be justified in terms of immediate revenue potential. During a company-wide meeting, Benjamin Hayes introduced me as VeraCore's founding visionary, rather than Chief Science Officer. It was a subtle shift in language, but it felt significant, as if I was being positioned as a figurehead rather than an active leader. Later that week, I overheard Stacy talking to Luke in the break room. "The board wants to move up the IPO timeline," she said in a low voice. "They think we need to show independence from the founders to maximize valuation." My blood ran cold. I didn't confront them. I wanted to gather more information first. That evening, I texted Derek. "Need to talk, confidential, tomorrow." We met for coffee the next morning. Derek listened intently as I outlined my suspicions. "It's not uncommon for acquiring companies to sideline founders eventually," he said when I finished. But usually not this quickly, and not when the founder is still adding significant technical value. What should I do? I asked. Document everything, he advised. Every meeting cancellation, every resource reallocation, every instance where you're bypassed in decision-making, and review your contract again, particularly any clauses related to termination. I dug out my copy of the acquisition agreement that evening, focusing on Section 12 Floors B, my insurance policy. It was still there. Exactly as negotiated, if terminated without cause, I could repurchase my equity for $1. The clause had a 5-year duration, and we were less than a year in. Over the next few weeks, I became increasingly vigilant, saving emails and recording meetings when legally permitted. The company continued to drift away from its original vision. Our core AI technology, once our crown jewel, was now treated as a static asset rather than an evolving innovation. The R&D budget was cut by 80%, with funds redirected to a flashy marketing campaign featuring a cartoonish mascot called Friendly Bot, a simplified, cutesy representation of our sophisticated AI system that made me cringe every time I saw it. Our old lab space was converted into a wellness lounge, with beanbag chairs and a smoothie bar. Meanwhile, my requests for additional computing resources to test new algorithms were repeatedly denied as non-essential expenditures. The exodus of original team members accelerated. By the 1-year mark after acquisition, only a handful of pre-Catalyst employees remained, mostly in junior positions. I felt increasingly isolated, a relic of VeraCore's past rather than a key part of its future. Then came the reorganization. Without consulting me, Luke announced a new corporate structure that placed all technical teams under the product department, which reported to him. My role as CSO was now essentially symbolic, with no direct reports and no budget authority. When I confronted him, his response was tellingly dismissive. This streamlines our decision-making process as we prepare for the next growth phase. Your role is still crucial. Nora, you're the face of innovation at VeraCore. We need you focused on thought leadership, not bogged down in management details. Face of innovation, thought leadership. These were euphemisms for figurehead with no actual power. That evening, Mikkel called me. We hadn't spoken one-on-one in weeks, both busy with our separate spheres in the new VeraCore. Can we meet for dinner? He asked, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. There's something we need to discuss. We met at a small restaurant far from the office, the kind of place where Catalyst West executives would never set foot. Mikhail looked terrible, pale, and tense, with dark circles under his eyes. They're planning to let you go, he said without preamble once we'd ordered, right before the IPO announcement. I felt oddly calm at this news. Part of me had been expecting it. How do you know? I was in a meeting that I wasn't supposed to be in, he explained. Luke thought I'd left, but I came back to grab my laptop. He was talking to Benjamin and Stacy about optics for the IPO filing and how having moved beyond the founder phase would position VeraCore as a mature enterprise ready for public investment. And you're just telling me this now? I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. Mikhail had the grace to look ashamed. I've been blind, Nora. I bought into their vision so completely that I didn't see what was happening. Or maybe I didn't want to see it. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of distress I remembered from our early days. They've been systematically pushing you out for months, and I helped them do it. Why the change of heart now? Because it's wrong, he said simply. What they're doing to you, what they're doing to VeraCore, it's all wrong. They're not interested in the technology or its potential to help businesses understand their customers better. They just want a profitable exit, regardless of what happens to the company afterward. I nodded slowly. Thank you for telling me. What's their timeline? 2 weeks, he said grimly. They're preparing the IPO filing now. Once it's ready, they'll terminate you, probably on a Friday afternoon to minimize media attention. I took a sip of water, my mind racing through possibilities. And you, are you staying? Mikhail looked down at his plate. They've offered me a significant promotion and equity package contingent on the IPO's success. Ah, I said, understanding completely. The golden handcuffs. I haven't accepted yet, he said quickly. I wanted to talk to you first. I studied my old friend and partner, seeing both his genuine regret and his ambition. It's okay, Mikhail. Do what's right for you. But I need to ask, will you help me? Help you how? He asked, wariness creeping into his expression. Nothing illegal or unethical, I assured him. I just need information, dates, plans, copies of relevant documents. I need to be prepared. He hesitated, then nodded. I owe you that much, at least. Over the next 2 weeks, Mikhail became my inside source, discreetly feeding me information about Catalyst West's plans. The IPO filing was indeed in progress, with a target announcement date just 3 weeks away. My termination was scheduled for the Friday before, exactly as he'd predicted. Meanwhile, I prepared my counter move. I reviewed Section 12B repeatedly, confirming with Derek that it was still valid and enforceable. I discreetly reached out to key clients, testing their loyalty to Viracor versus Catalyst West. I reconnected with former employees, gauging their interest in a potential new venture. The day of my termination arrived right on schedule. I was called into a meeting with Luke, Stacy, and a representative from HR at 4:00 p.m. on a Friday. Nora, we want to thank you for your contributions to Viracor. Luke began, his voice professionally somber. Your vision in founding this company created something truly special. I noticed the past tense, created, not creates. However, he continued, as we prepare for the next phase of growth, we've determined that a different scientific leadership approach is needed. We'll be restructuring the R&D department, and unfortunately, your position is being eliminated. I remained silent, watching him squirm slightly under my steady gaze. Of course, we want to be generous. Stacy jumped in, sliding a folder across the table. This severance package includes 6 months of salary and health benefits, plus acceleration of a portion of your options. I didn't touch the folder. What's the official reason for my termination? Luke cleared his throat. As I said, we're restructuring the department. This is a business decision, not a reflection on your performance. So I'm being terminated without cause, I clarified, wanting to get this on record. We prefer to call it a restructuring, but yes, there's no cause for termination in the sense of misconduct or performance issues. The HR representative confirmed. I nodded, keeping my face expressionless even as relief washed through me. They had just triggered Section 12B. I'll need time to review the severance package, I said, finally taking the folder. Of course. Luke smiled, clearly relieved that I wasn't making a scene. Take the weekend. We'll need your decision by Monday, though, and we'll need you to turn in your laptop and badge before you leave today. I gathered my personal items under the watchful eye of a security guard, a final indignity that I endured with outward calm. As I walked through the reception area for the last time, Stacy called out, "Good luck, Nora. Let us know if you need references for your next position." I smiled slightly as the elevator doors closed, leaving her false goodwill behind. They thought they'd won. They had no idea what was coming. The next morning, I mailed a simple envelope to Catalyst West's headquarters, addressed to their legal department. Inside was a $1 bill and a brief letter. Pursuant to Section 12B of the acquisition agreement dated date, I hereby exercise my right to repurchase my equity stake in Viracor Technologies, Inc., following my termination without cause. Enclosed is the agreed-upon purchase price of $1, once you earns. Please confirm receipt and process this transaction immediately. I'd also instructed Derek to file formal notice with their corporate counsel. Then, I waited. It took them 3 days to realize what was happening. I received a call from Marcus Reynolds, Catalyst West's legal counsel, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Ms. Whitman, we've received your unusual communication. I want to clarify that your interpretation of Section 12B is incorrect. The clause was intended to apply only in extraordinary circumstances. The language is quite clear. I replied calmly, if I'm terminated without cause within 5 years of the acquisition, I have the right to repurchase my equity at the specified price. I was terminated without cause. As confirmed by your own HR department, I've tendered the required payment. The equity is mine." "This is absurd," he sputtered. "You can't possibly expect to regain control of a $50 million company for $1. "I don't expect to regain control of a $50 million company," I corrected him. "I expect to enforce the legal agreement that both parties signed in good faith. What happens next is up to you." There was a long pause. "We'll need to discuss this internally," he finally said. "Don't take any actions based on your interpretation until you hear from us officially." "I'll give you 48 hours," I said. "After that, I'll proceed based on my rights under the agreement." The next day, I received another call, this time from Benjamin Hayes himself. "Nora," he began, his voice conciliatory, "there seems to be a misunderstanding. Why don't we meet in person to discuss a resolution that works for everyone?" "I'm available tomorrow morning," I said. "My office or yours?" There was a slight pause. "You have an office?" "Figure of speech," I replied smoothly. "Let's meet at Derek Hughes's law firm. I believe you know the address." The meeting the next day was tense. Benjamin and Marcus arrived with 2 additional lawyers. I brought only Derek. "Let's get to the point," Benjamin said once we were seated. "Your interpretation of Section 12B, while creative, doesn't align with the spirit of our agreement. However, we recognize that your contribution to Viracor was significant. And perhaps the severance package offered was insufficient. We're prepared to increase it substantially." "I'm not interested in a larger severance package," I said. "I'm exercising my right under Section 12B. Marcus jumped in. "That clause was never intended to be used this way. It was included as a safeguard against unjust termination, not as a mechanism to unwind a $50 million acquisition." "Then you should have written it differently," Derek interjected mildly. "The language is unambiguous. My client has the right to repurchase her equity at the specified price, which she has tendered." "This is ridiculous." Benjamin's voice rose slightly. "We'll fight this in court." "You could," I acknowledged. "But that would delay your IPO indefinitely. And when the tech press gets wind of how you pushed out a female founder right before going public." I let the implication hang in the air. Benjamin's jaw tightened. "What exactly do you want, Nora?" "Just what I'm entitled to under our agreement," I said simply. "My equity back." The meeting ended without resolution, but I could see the uncertainty in Benjamin's eyes. They hadn't anticipated this move, and they weren't prepared for it. Back in my apartment that evening, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. "Nora, it's James Wong." "James," I said, genuinely pleased to hear from our former data scientist. "How are you?" "I'm good, but that's not why I'm calling." He paused. "I heard what happened. Word travels fast in tech circles. And I think what they did to you is wrong. I left because I could see where things were heading. But you stayed and fought." He took a deep breath. "If you're planning what I think you're planning, I want in." By the end of the week, I'd received similar calls from Lena and 4 other former employees. They were all watching from the sidelines, waiting to see if I could really pull this off. Meanwhile, Catalyst West was scrambling. Through Mikhail, I learned that they'd discovered a fatal flaw in their legal position. They had never properly completed the merger of Viracor's original corporate entity into Catalyst West's structure. It was a technical oversight, but a significant one. The entity I'd originally founded, the one specified in Section 12B, still existed as a separate legal entity, merely dormant. This meant that my equity repurchase right was even stronger than I'd initially thought. I wasn't just entitled to shares in the Catalyst West-controlled company, I could potentially reclaim control of the original entity that still technically owned the core intellectual property. When their lawyers realized this vulnerability, Catalyst West changed tactics. Marcus called with a new proposal. They would return 30% of the equity to me and guarantee my position as CSO for at least 3 years. "No deal," I said. "Section 12B entitles me to my full original stake." "Be reasonable, Nora," he urged. 30% of a successful public company will be worth far more than 100% of a company with no funding or infrastructure. I'll take my chances, I replied. 3 days later, as Catalyst West continued to stall, I made my next move. I contacted Viracor's 3 largest clients, companies I'd personally brought on board and with whom I'd maintained strong relationships. I explained the situation truthfully. I was exercising my legal right to reclaim my equity in Viracor, and I would soon be reestablishing the company's original focus on innovative AI solutions. We signed with Viracor because of your technology and vision, the CTO of our largest client told me. The recent changes under Catalyst West have been concerning. Keep us posted on your progress. The following Monday, those 3 clients, representing nearly 40% of Viracor's current revenue, sent formal notices that they were reviewing their contracts in light of the leadership changes. Catalyst West panicked. Benjamin called me directly, his composure finally cracking. "What the hell did you say to Midstate Financial?" he demanded. "The truth," I replied calmly, "that I'm exercising my rights under our agreement and will soon be resuming independent operations." "You're interfering with our client relationships. That's tortious interference, and we'll sue." "They were my clients before they were yours," I reminded him. And I simply provided factual information about a significant change in the company's ownership structure, something you should have disclosed to them yourselves. There was a long pause. "What will it take to end this, Nora? Name your price." "I've already named it, $1, as specified in Section 12B. The next day, a tech industry blog broke the story. AI startup founder poised to reclaim company for $1 after pre-IPO ousting. The article detailed how I'd been pushed out just before the planned IPO announcement and was now exercising a clause in the acquisition agreement to buy back my equity for a single dollar. The story went viral in tech circles. I received messages of support from other founders who'd been similarly sidelined by investors. One Holler founder started trending on Twitter. Catalyst West's reputation was taking a beating, with potential implications for their entire portfolio. By the end of the week, they surrendered. I received a formal notice acknowledging my equity repurchase right and agreeing to transfer control of the original Viracor entity back to me, including all intellectual property. They would retain the new Viracor name and brand assets created under their ownership, but the core technology and original client contracts would revert to me. I immediately called James, Lena, and the others who had reached out. "We're back in business," I told them. "Meet me at the Denver airport on Monday. We're starting fresh." Denver was a deliberate choice, far from Detroit, but also far from Austin, where Catalyst West was headquartered. A neutral territory where we could rebuild without the shadows of the past looming over us. Within 3 weeks, we had secured a modest office space and begun reassembling our team. Almost all of our original technical staff returned, drawn by the chance to work in the innovative environment they'd missed. We had no fancy furniture, no smoothie bar, just a circle of desks, whiteboards covering the walls, and the shared determination to reclaim our vision. We reincorporated as empiric AI, a nod to our focus on understanding empirical human behavior through artificial intelligence. Our mission remained the same: creating AI that could understand and interpret nonverbal human communication in ways that enhanced business-customer relationships. The first month was challenging. We had the technology and the talent, but we were starting from scratch in terms of infrastructure and funding. I invested nearly all of my savings to keep us afloat as we rebuilt our systems and reached out to former clients. To our surprise, clients began returning faster than we'd anticipated. The media coverage of our story had created awareness, and many businesses were intrigued by both our technology and our resilience. Within 3 months, we had regained most of our original client base and added several new ones. Meanwhile, Catalyst West's new Viracor was struggling. Without the original technology team, they couldn't maintain or enhance the AI system properly. The IPO was postponed indefinitely. Luke resigned as CEO 6 months after my departure, and Stacy followed shortly after. posting a self-righteous LinkedIn message about seeking new challenges that align with my values. Mikhail's position was particularly awkward. He had accepted the promotion offered by Catalyst West, only to find himself on a sinking ship. We spoke occasionally, our friendship damaged but not destroyed by the events that had transpired. I made the wrong choice, he admitted during one of our calls. I thought I was being practical, but I was just being short-sighted. We all make mistakes, I told him, meaning it. The question is what we learn from them. A year after reclaiming my company, I was invited to deliver a keynote address at the Future of Ethics in AI conference in San Francisco. Standing on that stage, looking out at an audience of peers and industry leaders, I felt a profound sense of vindication. The journey of empiric AI, formerly known as VeraCore, hasn't been a straight line. I began. It started in a rundown apartment with a broken microwave and pizza dinners, moved through corporate boardrooms with smoothie bars and motivational posters, and now exists in a space of our own creation, one built on genuine innovation and respect for both human potential and human limitations. I shared our story openly, not glossing over my own mistakes and naivety in the acquisition process. I explained how a single clause in a contract, Section 12B, had ultimately saved the company's soul. In the end, I concluded, technology is created by humans, for humans. The moment we forget that, the moment we prioritize financial engineering over actual engineering, we lose the essence of what makes innovation meaningful. As I finished, I held up a framed object for the audience to see, the original $1 bill I'd sent to Catalyst West, now mounted alongside a copy of Section 12B. Sometimes, I said with a smile, the most valuable things can be purchased for just $1. The applause was thunderous, but more gratifying were the conversations afterward, with young founders seeking advice on how to protect their visions, with potential clients interested in our technology, and with former employees of other companies who had experienced similar corporate takeovers. 2 years after our rebirth as Empiric AI, we were thriving. Our technology had evolved in ways that wouldn't have been possible under Catalyst West's short-term, profit-focused management. We had expanded into healthcare, developing systems that could detect early signs of patient distress based on nonverbal cues, potentially saving lives by alerting medical staff before vital signs showed problems. We remained private, turning down multiple acquisition offers. Instead, we accepted strategic investments that left control firmly in our hands. I made sure every key employee had equity, ownership that couldn't be diluted or negated by corporate maneuvers. On the 3rd anniversary of Empiric AI's founding, we moved into a new headquarters, directly across the street from the building where VeraCore's offices had been under Catalyst West. It wasn't a coincidence. I'd deliberately chosen the location as a reminder of our journey. Standing at the window of my new office, looking out at the building across the street, now occupied by a different company. As Catalyst West had eventually sold off what remained of their version of VeraCore, I felt neither bitterness nor regret. Only a quiet satisfaction. Mikhail joined us at Empiric AI 6 months later. After his contract with Catalyst West ended, his return wasn't automatic or easy. He had to rebuild trust with me and with the team. But his experience with what not to do proved valuable as we charted our path forward. I still can't believe they underestimated you so completely, he said one evening as we shared a rare moment of reflection. They thought because you were focused on the technology, you wouldn't understand the business or legal aspects. I smiled. They made a lot of assumptions, that I'd be grateful just to keep a job title, that I wouldn't read the fine print, that I wouldn't fight back. Their biggest mistake was thinking you needed them more than they needed you, Mikhail observed. They never understood that the real value was in your vision and the team you built around it, not in their funding or connections. 5 years after reclaiming my company, Empiric AI was valued at over $300 million, 6 times what Catalyst West had paid for VeraCore. We had offices in 4 cities and clients across the globe. Our technology was recognized as the gold standard in behavioral AI, and I was frequently asked to speak about both our technical innovations and our unusual corporate journey. Luke Camden. I heard, had moved to a series of increasingly less prestigious positions. His reputation tarnished by the Veracore debacle. Benjamin Hayes remained at Catalyst West, though the firm had never quite recovered from the negative publicity surrounding our case. Stacy Bruner had rebranded herself as a corporate culture consultant, whatever that meant. I rarely thought about them anymore. My focus was entirely on the future, on pushing the boundaries of what our technology could accomplish and ensuring that empiric AI remained true to its founding principles. In my office, alongside awards and technical patents, hung a simple frame containing a $1 bill and a printed copy of Section 12-B. It was more than a memento of victory. It was a reminder that sometimes the most important things are hidden in plain sight, in the details others overlook. They had pushed me out of the company I built, thinking it was a simple matter of corporate maneuvering. They never understood that I had protected myself with more than just a legal clause. I had protected myself with knowledge, relationships, and the unwavering belief in what I had created. They let me go before their IPO, thinking they no longer needed the founder who had built the technology from scratch. But I took back what was mine, not just because a contract allowed it, but because I refused to let my vision be corrupted by those who couldn't see beyond the next quarterly report. In the end, they thought they won. But I wrote the rules. And in my rulebook, persistence and integrity always triumph over short-term thinking and corporate greed. My name is Nora Whitman. I lost my company, and then I took it back. This is my story, one that I hope will inspire other founders to protect what they build, to stand their ground when challenged, and to remember that sometimes the best revenge isn't just success, it's success on your own terms.